And welcome to the first episode that we have in the TSA department with Ed Supply. There's a few things that we will talk about in the next coming episodes in the next coming weeks, and hope to have some different people on, different interviews with some service techs, some business owners, and also letting you know what's new coming down the pike or what's on the horizon that is new for ICP. One of the things I do want to talk about, probably one of the most, reoccurrences or things I see the most when I'm out in the field following up on service calls or technical problems. And they vary. Usually when you're out in the field, you run into people always get, I don't know what the best word for it is maybe it's they get too close to it, or they're all involved in it and they overlook a lot of things, or maybe it's just a homeowner wanted to swap out a unit, wanted a new unit, or maybe you have to where you look at it and say, well, we didn't do the install, we didn't do the duct work, we didn't do this, we didn't do that, we just swapped out the unit and that's all the homeowner paid for. But you need to understand some things, that this isn't the 80s and it's not the 90s, and technology has changed. Whether you've been in it 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. I've been in it since 1994. So to say that everything's the same since 1994 would be ludicrous. Or to say that, I know what to do because I've been doing it since 20 years or 30 years. That's ludicrous. Things have changed. And we need to embrace change, and we need to embrace that. And if you can either look at it and let it overwhelm you, and then you'll be looking for retirement or trying to find another job, or you'll have a bad reputation or whatever it may be. We've all been there. We've all made a bunch of mistakes. That's how we learn. But for some of it, it is embracing change. And in this industry, if you ever get to the point to where you're not learning or you stopped learning, there's an issue, there's a problem, because no one knows it all. There's some very smart people that I talk to that I rely on when I'm in a jam or I don't understand or I don't know. But I've always learned in this industry, it's always good to find out. If you don't know, talk to people who do know the problem you're having. And when I was a service tech, I reached out to all the TSAs of that particular brand for, ICP, Frigidaire, Goodman, whatever the brand may be, Trane, American Standard, whatever the name brand may be. Every brand has a TSA. And my role is TSA with Ed Supply. And I'm responsible for, let's say, ICP. Products, whether it be Tempstar or Day and Night. If it is Allied, whether it's Duquesne or Allied. Let's see, the High Air brand, the GE Connect brand, April Air, Santa Fe, Honeywell, all these things, all these products we sell, it's my job to educate myself on these to be able to answer and handle any question that comes down the pike. Now, I'm by no means the end-all, be-all, and by no means am I a know-it-all, and by no means am I saying this is the way it is or else. It's not that way. Some things you may hear, you may say, well, I don't understand that, and I will dig out the information, send it to you if I need to. But one of the main things that I have ran into when I was a tech, I didn't do this, and I didn't understand this, didn't even know, didn't even hear of it. But with static pressure. Static pressure, as I've gotten deeper into the learning part of ICP and their products, how sensitive not just ICP products are, but all the other products in general. And when I was with Goodman, Goodman had a bad rep because all the Goodmans were going bad, and that seemed like most of my service calls were on Goodman's. Well, it was because Goodman was like a builder's grade on some of their stuff. And let me back up. Let me pause right there. Every brand has a builder's grade. So a Goodman builder's grade Now they have like a Liberty line of series, or they have the other upper tier brands of Goodman, and the name actually escapes me after I dealt with them for several years. But like with ICP, we have Tempstar has a builder's grade like the R series. They have a better grade, the N series, and then you can get up into the communicating series and all these other things depending on what your need is that you want to fulfill. And so you got to understand that. And most people can afford the builder's grade. So you have a lot of techs or installers or owners that try to make as much money as they can to stay in business. They'll go with a builder's grade, and then they'll throw it in and do the best that they know how at the time and never read an install manual. They never double check things. They take everybody's word for this is the way it is, and you never look for yourself or check things out. So I hope this helps. This is by no means a bash session, by no means, but it's a understanding session that times have changed. When the X13 motor come out on the scene, 10 years ago, I'd say, maybe not that long, but right around in that area. It was kind of really before its time, because what they should have done when they brought out the X13 motor was to say, make sure you educate all the techs, because this new motor is very sensitive to static pressure. Now, that X13 is we all know, when it first came on the market, everybody was hating on the X13 motor. The concept was good, but it just seemed like we were replacing them left and right. And no one, we were blaming the X13s, but no one was checking static pressure. It was in the install manuals, but no one ever read the install manuals. No one ever looked at that and said, oh, this is why I'm losing X13 motors. This is why, because they're overheating. Now, some of your motors will have, when they can't breathe, they ramp up. And you have some motors, when they can't breathe, they slow down. The X13s were those that when they can't breathe, they slow down. And as they slow down, they can't move air across them, because that's how they cool themselves. They can't move air across them, so they overheat, short circuit, or if they're in a bad location and the drain pan overflows because the drain's clogged up, or because of static pressure, and the water blows on the X13 motor and runs down into the housing or the module on it and fries it. That happens. So there was a lot of progress between when X13s first came out and where X13s are today. In saying that, static pressure is king. Static pressure overrules everything. And if you're putting in a unit, and I'm gonna share some instances that happened, and I will not name company names or individual names. I'm not going to do that, but I will tell you things I've ran into that I'm sure most of you, when you're a service tech and you go into somebody's home and you are replacing a piece of equipment, you're going to start to want to look at static pressure. You're going to want to start looking at what caused this to go out. How could this have been prevented? And sometimes with your companies, you may be responsible to go out and actually make certain amount of money per call and be on a service call for, say, you have like 1 hour time limit that you have to get the service call done, and then you have to go on to the next job. And so sometimes you're rushed, or you got 9 service calls and you want to go home early, or you want to be home by a decent time. You're going to run in it, and you're going to overlook a lot of things. But as a business owner, if you are hearing this, or maybe your service tech is, and he can pass this along to you, is it will benefit you as a company, as a business, to make sure your techs know and understand static pressure and how to check it, because every X13 motor you replace went out for a reason. And if you don't know what that reason is, the one you replace is going to go out. Same thing with a compressor. If you get on a service call with a compressor bad and you replace that compressor, if you didn't fix what caused it to go out, it's going to go out again. And then this homeowner is going to have all this money paid for and invested, and you're not fixing the problem. So be sure to, when you replace these components, find out what is the cause of the problem. Now, when we replace a compressor that you get to a house and the compressor won't pump, there's a reason it quit pumping. Now, we'll say that's a mechanical failure and replace it and put on the warranty card, it's quit pumping, it's mechanical failure, and we send it on through the process line. And a lot of times, Copeland and LG and these different compressor makers have so many of these things coming down the pike that they kind of just go through them and reprocess them, because what we understand and what we're being told is 75 to 80% of the compressors that they receive are not bad. And I'm going to say that again. 75 to 80% of the compressors that you warranty and send back are not bad. Now, being in the position that I'm in, and I haven't been in this position with Ed's long since August of last year, there was a lot of compressors. We go through bins and bins and bins of compressor. People are saying that, condemning the unit, saying it's got a bad compressor, it needs this and that, but they don't know why it's bad. And you'll be surprised when you check static pressure what the root cause is it's airflow. And we're doing an actual class today on why compressors fail. And it goes back to airflow. And what I want you to do is I want you to try to picture or understand when air, a unit doesn't make air, it just moves it from one side of the building or home to the other side of the building or home and distributes it. And along the way, it removes the heat, is how we get AC. It's not actually putting cold air in, it's removal of the heat. And so you have to be able to, if I'm removing heat, I have to bring heated air across a coil that is being cool refrigerant coming through it. And I have to be able to keep that coil from freezing. I have to have a certain amount of airflow come across that coil, or the coil's going to ice up and freeze. Everybody understands that part and knows it. Well, then if we pause right there and we look outside the unit, that has to transfer the heat out of the house, and it does that through the condensing unit. Well, if those coils are dirty and it can't do that, it retains a lot of pressure on that compressor. So if the airflow is not like it's supposed to be, we all know your coils are going to clean. So we tell the homeowner, well, you need to clean your coils so it don't freeze up. But at the same time, you also need to clean your coils so you don't overwork your compressor and overwork your X13. Same thing with changing the filter. Same thing with cleaning the condensing unit, checking airflow, checking static pressure. Now, back in the day, when I got in the business in '94, I started in at the base level of an installer, and I worked for a company called Allied Mechanical, and we were more of a commercial, very little residential, unless it was a huge house. We did, a lot of installs, and we made our own ductwork. And when they did ductwork back then, they did square duct with insulated, put glue in it, put the thumb, hit the nails in it, and people still make ductwork that way to this day. Now, over the period of years, they've learned technology is different, and sometimes you have issues if you have ductwork insulated on the inside for, say, safe or size area to where you need it's tight space or tight quarters or whatever. And a lot of people still make ductwork to that day. Now, me personally, my personal opinion, I don't like that. I had my house that way. And when I took and changed the ductwork out, I seen what was inside that ductwork. Now, if I had a cold, the flu, and I'm coughing and sneezing, and that goes into the unit, yes, technically the filter is supposed to catch that. A lot of times the filter don't catch it, and it goes into the ductwork fibers, and it stays in the fibers, and over time it releases, and you're breathing that same mold, bacteria, colds, cough, flus, whatever. You're breathing it back in, and you constantly seem to stay sick every 2 to 3 to 6 months. You're always catching and getting something because your air's not clean. And I went through these air purification classes, and I went through all these classes with ICP, and looking at how important this is. So if you look at your static pressure and your airflow is not blowing across the coils, we're going to have, where does that go? Where does that pressure go? Where can it go? Can't go anywhere but back to the compressor. All that compressor is a motor, and it pumps. It's going to pump, and it don't stop pumping. But when the scrolls go together and they're creating that pressure, and that pressure is exceeding, then you have all this pressure on this compressor, and as it heats and cools down, and there's a thermal overload or thermal, I'll get the words right here in a minute, but the thermal overload on the inside, when it reaches a certain temperature, it shuts the compressor down, lets it cool off, and then it will go back again. Now, a compressor cools itself by the refrigerant coming through it. Okay, so we'll understand that when you see a cutaway, and we've actually tore compressors open to look at them, but I don't want to get too far off subject. On static pressure, so let's start there. When you go into a house or a home, and the first thing most people will look at it, they'll look at the return, they'll see if it's the return filter is clean or dirty, and then they'll decide if it's big enough, change your filter, and they do all these things, and they kind of go on about their way. They never look at the ductwork. They look at the return grill, the return filter, never look at the ductwork. They may look at the flex, but I'm going to tell you, here's what you need to understand in this with these new equipment coming and static pressure being so sensitive is friction. And friction is what slows the air down. So if you have ductboard or ductwork with insulation on the inside, it's the same as friction. Same, they're kind of real close to the same. Ductboard has sometimes a little maybe smooth, coarser insulation than regular ductwork with insulation on the inside, but that is the worst airflow restriction on the market. Is ductboard or insulated on the inside ductwork, and then the second is flex, and then the best is hard duct or round pipe's actually the best because airflow is in a circular motion. So round pipe is the best. Square duct is second when insulation on the outside. Flex, and then you have ductboard. So if we understand that, we look at flex as it's already a flexible pipe that's insulated, and it's cost effective from a labor standpoint. So a lot of installers will do that. Well, if an owner of a company buys flex because it is a labor saving product and easy to install, but we never train the person in the field how to do it, and he just says, okay, well, I slide this on, I put a Panduit strap on it, or I tape it, and then I pull the insulation up on it, and I tape that down, then I go to the other side. No one ever says you've got to pull it tight. And it can't be kinked when it goes in, or kinked when it goes into 90s or bends. And so the owner saving money doesn't get to the level of training his people on how to install it and the proper way of doing it. But what the owner also doesn't see is with the new regulations on motors and X13s, that 14-inch round pipe that carries 1,000 CFMs, 14-inch round flex carries 700 because of friction. And that number is going to change. So if that's 10-inch round, you're going to carry less 10-inch flex than you would hard pipe. So those numbers are very critical to understand those numbers and investigate what you're actually putting in a house. You may think that the size diameter is going to carry the CFM, but if you put it all in flex or a spider box, my gosh, is the worst static pressure thing on the market. It's cheap and easy to install, and people make a lot of money saving labor on a spider box. But that's a bomb waiting to go off. So that's my 2 cents on that. But I've actually seen it in progress, and I've actually tested static pressure on a spider box, and it is astronomical high. So here's what happens. On your install manual, when you look at it, it gives you a chart of airflow from 0.01 all the way up to 1.0 static pressure. Now, your units up until this past year, were all based out on a 0.05 test scale. Some were 0.02. Well, I've seen one house in my time that was 0.054. That was the best I've ever seen, and that was down in Blue Ridge in LJ. The company put that in. I was very impressed. And I'm going to go back to that in just a second, but that's the best one I've seen. The worst one I've seen was 86, 85, somewhere in there. And when you look at the chart that these companies send out and say, if you have your fan, which is the old X13s, are 5 speeds, speed number 1 being low, speed number 5 being high. And with ICP, tap 4 and tap 3 are the same RPM. So you can put your cooling on tap 3 and your heat on tap 4, and your blower motor will turn the same amount of RPMs and will move the same amount of airflow. Now, you also have to understand that going through a heat kit will have some kind of resistance on that, as well as going across a wet coil will have some kind of resistance on that. So what you're trying to do is eliminate turbulence and restriction. That's what we're trying to do. The easier and smoother air flows from one end to the end, the unit will be quieter, it'll last its 10 years or longer, and you won't have any problems. You got to change, keep it maintained, of course, and change your air filters. So when it's installed right, there's very little maintenance and upkeep on them. But when they're not installed right, you'll have capacitors going out. You're going to have contactors that's going to arc and get plated, and you're going to have, or pitted, and you're going to have all these issues with blower motor slowing down, squirrel cages not being clean, can't move air. I went into a house one time, it was actually a mobile home, and the mobile home floor was shaking, and it was so loud the homeowners were yelling at each other sitting on the couch in the recliner because they couldn't hear because it was so loud. And when we got there, just looked at the squirrel cage, and it was totally full. Every cup of that blade was full of just dirt and lint from the house over the years. So it wasn't moving any air. It was just like paddling air. It wasn't scooping and moving air. It was just like pushing. So it was rattling. We cleaned all that off, oiled the motor up, and it ran quiet. They couldn't even hear it running. Amazing what the right airflow will do. So in doing this thing with static pressure, there's several different ways you can do it. You can look on the website. You're on the website at tsaedsupply.com, and you'll be able to go to the static pressure tab, and it'll tell you everything I'm fixing to tell you and more, and you'll be able to see where to test this unit at, where to get my static pressure readings at. And most people out in the field have a dual manometer for checking gas pressure on a furnace, but they don't have the duct probes. They just have the little hoses and the little tips they put up there. That won't work. All right, it just won't work. Don't send your tech out to do a job and not give him the right tools to do it. Because if the tech's has the right tools to do the job right, he's going to make you more money and more successful in the long run. So keep that in mind. But send your techs out, train them, and send them out equipped to be successful. And you'll be successful. But they got to have the duct probes. And you take this in a couple of different readings. Usually it's 8 to 10 inches off of the supply and 2 to 3 to 4 inches off the return where the probes are pointing back at the blower motor. And then you add, you don't subtract, you don't get a difference, you add those numbers together. So you'll be able to read what that unit's actually doing. You take that number, all right, what that static pressure, let's say that static pressure is 0.08. Then you go on your graph and you look and say, okay, I'm in cool mode and my static pressure is 0.08. Then I look at that fan tab and that's on tab 3. So I go down to the tab 3 in the install book and go all the way across to it says 0.08 and it'll tell me what my CFM is. You take that CFM, and if you've got some field piece apps have them, different apps have them, but you can put that CFM in cool mode, that CFM, and it'll spit out what your BTUs are. The most frustrating thing you could do for a homeowner is to have a 2,000 or a 24,000 BTU unit, a 2-ton as we call it, and it's only putting out 12,000 BTU. What's going to happen? Homeowner's going to be irate. The unit's going to run nonstop. They're never going to be happy. And guess what? Word of mouth travels. Bad news travels faster than good news. So you will be getting called back, fussed at, griped at. No matter how new the equipment is, no matter how new the ductwork is, I get so blue-faced from telling people it doesn't matter how many of these you do. Every situation is different. So if you look at that number on your chart and you see, okay, wow, I'm supposed to have 800 plus CFMs and I've only got 600. So I'm not getting enough airflow across that coil to deliver the right amount of BTUs or CFM. So that compressor is working harder because it's made to pump a certain amount of BTUs out, and you can't deliver that because your fan speed's not set right or your ductwork's got restriction in it. So then you can always go in and speed the tab up, check your static pressure again, see if you've made an improvement or you made it worse. If you have to slow it down, then you have to slow it down and find out what the issue there is. And sometimes when you slow that thing down to get within your static pressure reading, you're blowing not enough air across the coil and you're going to have the coil freeze up, or you're going to have frost lines going back and you're going to think, oh my gosh, it's low with Freon. Boom, I put Freon in it, and now you've overcharged your system when everything gets straightened back out. So you've got to look at those things and go in and change it, keep changing it and change it till you get it dialed in where it's supposed to be at. And sometimes once that thing is installed, there's no way out to fix it except increase the return. That's usually the easiest. But if you've got a wall and finished sheetrock or whatever, and you've got a return grill, and you cannot go any bigger, you're going to have to add another return. And so looking at these things and saying, I've got to get more airflow across. I'll tell you something that was interesting is I ran across this, and I really didn't stop, I guess. I didn't stop what I was doing and look at it and say, is this as important as they all say it is? So I had a home that was having an issue with dehumidification, and they were having mold growing in the house, brand spanking new house. The homeowners hadn't even moved in yet. They were still finishing it up. And the downstairs had mold growing coming up the stairwell, and the homeowner was like, hey, this has got to be fixed, you know. So the unit seemed to be running, seemed to be doing everything normal, and so they wanted to put in a dehumidifier. So I get called in after everything's been in place and installed and the dehumidifiers are not working. So I had to be familiar with the dehumidifier brand that they were using and find out. So I go out there and I see some issues and I correct them. And 2 days later, get the call, hey, this thing's still acted up. So I go back out there again, make a few corrections, and then I call the manufacturer and I'm talking to them. And I was like, I don't understand why this thing's not working right. We've got the manual and we've installed it like the manual says. And on the install, it's done exactly like what your book says. So I don't understand why this thing is overheating. And he said, well, what's your static pressure? I said, well, I don't know. I hadn't checked it yet. He goes, well, you need to check it, because if you're you're pulling air out of a return and then dumping it back into the supply, you may have such a high static pressure that the little motor in the dehumidifier cannot push that dry air into the jet stream that's being created by the ductwork and the blower motor. And I thought, well, I never thought of that. And he goes, that's why if you look at the optional setting to where you can pull it out of the return and then go 6 feet down the return, put it back in the return, you don't have to worry about the static pressure settings. And I said, now that made a huge difference in what we were doing. So then I started looking into airflow, static pressure, and found out how critical this is. So when you get your duct probes and you get your manometer together, add those numbers. You can sometimes, if you have 6 inches coming off the unit before a 90, check it before that 90, check it after that 90. Sometimes you want to check if you're in a furnace, go in the furnace without any restrictions on the wet coil, then check it right above the coil and check it different places. Then you got to look at, hey, the filter's going to get dirty, so I'm going to have restriction in the ductwork. And if you look at it and say, okay, if I'm borderline right now with a brand new clean filter in, that homeowner has to, when this filter starts to get dirty, my static pressure is going to go up. And when that happens, we're going to have issues with that motor. So there's things, and I'm about to run out of time. I didn't want to keep it about 30 minutes, and I'll talk more in the future on other podcasts about this. But I wanted to share this real quick. Static pressure is king. Check static pressure. No matter what the service call is, check static pressure. You'll be able to get more business on fixing problems, fixing airflow issues, and also when you put in a compressor or put in a motor, you're going to have better results when you get the static pressure right. So that's all for this episode. I will catch you back and we will continue the conversation about static pressure.